Back for another edition of In the Huddle. Carl Dukes put him up along with Jason La Canfora. Of course, Brian Baldinger, a part of this podcast as well. And guys, we are down to the final week. AFC Championship game, NFC Championship game. And we're going to break those games down later in the week with Baldy as he'll join us. But Jason, we got to talk about a few things that are going on right now in the National Football League before we talk about what happened last week. And listen, I thought the games, especially Sunday's games, were very entertaining.
Yeah.
We'll get to the Chiefs and we'll talk about, their chance to three-peat and all of that. But as we record this podcast, guys, on Tuesday, Ben Johnson is hired as the new Bears head coach. That we know for sure. There's a lot of rumor mill out there about who's going where. We are not going to address all of that because some of that could change. And so we're just going to hold pat and wait until some of this actually happens. But, Jason, let's start there before we review these games and talk about what we saw in the playoffs in the divisional round last weekend. The Ben Johnson hire. And I think a guy named, Jason La Canfora said Ben Johnson was going to take a job this time around, and he did. My question is this the right job for him? Because Chicago, I know he's in the same division. He gets Caleb Williams. But, Jason, I've heard people have reservations about, and whether it's fair or unfair, we don't know yet. Leadership, is he a leader of men? His personality, is it going to work? We know he's an offensive genius, and He's shown that over the last 3 years. What do you think?
Well, there's no guarantees. There's certainly no guarantees. There's no way to replicate this other than to do it. I think he's been more than worthy of an opportunity for a while now. We live in a society that's very much in the moment. It's very easy to forget what Detroit Lions football was synonymous with going back 50 years prior to 2022. Like, you could literally look at 50 years of Lions football and you never thought of them as one of the most innovative, one of the most forward-thinking, progressive, at the vanguard of modern NFL passing and overall offensive attacking philosophies. You never thought about them as one of the most balanced teams. Through their, you had a couple years with Stafford, where things were kind of prolific, but it was never anything that was sort of this tapestry, this offensive tapestry or symphony. And that's what it's really been for 3 years now. Doesn't mean it's going to all work. But if it happens right under your nose in Chicago and you built something last year that you kind of sold to your fans and your sponsors and your people as very different than Chicago Bears football, right? And what's supposed to be synonymous with that. And you built the team not from the inside out, but from the outside in, with skill players and people who can affect the ball and affect the game downfield without really doing enough to find people to affect the game at the line of scrimmage before we get downfield, right? Like they sold that we've got all these fancy things and all these pretty toys and we're going to put them all together and it's going to work. And they lack the innards to make it work. But that's who they want to be. Like they clearly, like, they aspire to be a team more like everybody else, but frankly, more like what everybody else in their division's doing. More like the Lions offense, more like the Packers offense, more like the Vikings offense. And they made investments, like I said, in certain positions, not enough in others. So they find themselves in this situation where they need another coach again. And the field is not particularly strong. And, there's some retreads, guys who've done it before, mostly pretty pedestrian, who you could go to and make a safe choice or safe-ish. And I think McCarthy, right, would have been that guy for them.
Yep.
Or if you have a chance to land this guy who for 3 years, 2 years, people were trying to get, and he said, no, it's not right. No, it's not right. No, it's not right. You try to make it right. And I thought he was going to go to Vegas. I'll be honest with you. Like, when that game ended the other night and Tom Brady's on the call and Tom Brady's got a chance to be around Ben Johnson and Tom Brady's team in Las Vegas is setting up interviews with Lance Newmark, who a lot of people in the league think is the guy who Ben Johnson would love to work with as his GM in a perfect world. Lance is Washington's assistant GM. They were together in Detroit. And Washington's playing in that game too. It just all kind of felt to me like this is coming together for the Raiders. But the Raiders don't have a quarterback, and the Raiders don't have a road to a quarterback. The Raiders won a couple games down the stretch that took them from 1st overall to 6th overall. And the problem for Tom Brady and the Raiders is at 6th overall, they're in no man's land because the quarterbacks are probably going 1-2. So you're either mortgaging a ton to try to get up and get them. And in all likelihood, some of these teams just aren't going to trade. Like, I just think it is what it is. There's too many teams ahead of them who need a quarterback. So I think that's what it came down to is, all right, who's closer to ready to go? He already knows the Lions inside out, right? The Lions are the bully on the block in that division. Well, if I leave that team, the best team in division gets worse. I make the Bears better. I know inside and out how to beat the Lions, so I can help even that gap. And I've got Caleb Williams to work with. I don't have to spend all spring and late winter in meetings scheming up how we get a quarterback. And the problem is there's just not much out there. I mean, it really isn't. Like, I got people in the league telling me, dude, I might try to trade for Malik Willis. Because, like, well, you know what I mean? Would you rather trade for Malik Willis or would you rather give Justin Fields $25-30 million a year? I don't know. Like, is that what Fields is going to get? He might. Like, I don't know. It's not going to be chump change because there's nobody else out there. Like, do I want to figure out if Sam Darnold is real or not for whatever that's going to cost? Or would I rather go to call the Patriots and say, hey, do you really need Drake May and Joe Milton? Like, I think Joe Milton, and do you want Joe Milton, another young guy behind your starter? Or would you rather have a veteran there and get something for Joe? So, like, that's how people are thinking because it's just like the top of the market is Aaron Rodgers, Sam Darnold, Justin Fields, and Russell Wilson. There's only 2 in the draft, and they're going bing bong. And so then it's like, well, how do I creatively get a quarterback? Okay, somebody could trade for Cousins. That obviously has caveats as well. So because of this quarterback climate, I think for Ben Johnson, it was like, well, let me go. Either franchise, Vegas or Chicago, they've both been toxic. They've both been losers. They both are like what the Lions were when he got there, are kind of a laughing stock. He's picking the one that's probably the best equipped, that he knows the best. And I get it.
Kevin Warren and Ryan Poles, the general manager, obviously making this decision. They interviewed a ton of guys.
Yes.
Only time will tell, to your point, if Ben Johnson is that guy as a head coach. And remember, here's the thing we now know about the Lions, right? When they hired their head coach in Dan Campbell, and the clown show he put on at the beginning of that hire made us all wonder, does this guy really get it? Now, 4 years in, right, we know not only does he get it, but his guys buy in. He's built this culture of there's this emotional thing that he's got in connection. And let's be honest, Jason, he's Detroit. He's a hard, grinding kind of dude, right? I don't know if Ben Johnson is Chicago, right?
Well, but I think it's new Chicago. It's because they're rebranding. I mean, this is they want to be
Detroit.
Like, yeah. I'm trying to think if there's another comp. Washington.
Okay, fair.
Right? Like,
fair.
What was Washington's football identity for, again, we can go back
20 years.
I mean,
right?
Really, more than that. I mean, you can even go back to like late 90s and we're going to win 10 games with Brad Johnson and you know what I mean? And do a little something, but it never really, they didn't have like an overarching offensive identity that like became what their football was about. And then they get Jayden Daniels and you know what I mean? And they get the right people around them and that changes. So I think that's kind of the point is like, we're done kind of being that. I think they tried it in the past. Like, I think they thought they were onto something with Trestman and what he was doing in the CFL. Like that, there was a time where they should have hired Bruce Arians, right? And they didn't.
Agreed.
They decided, I think it was Trestman they chose over Bruce Arians. Bruce Arians goes
to
Tampa, no risk it, no biscuit. We know how that ended. So I think they've thought about it in the past. I think they've tried to do it in the past. I think they've got to be fully committed to it now. I mean, the thing is, like with Poles, he's on a different timeline than the coach. You know what I mean? Like the coach has never done this before. Poles is going on his third coach. Like it's, you know what I mean? Like so,
this is it for him.
Yeah. I wonder how aligned they, remain or ownership. Like if they can't rebuild the offensive line this year, and the kid's getting hit too much, and you got somebody and you got somebody who can scheme it up, then don't you go to the evaluator and say we got to get somebody else to get the right people in here?
Yes, of course. Absolutely. Yeah, they need O-line big time. And whether, that's through free agency, adding a couple of pieces or drafting, I totally agree. You've got the skill position guys. They just can't protect Caleb Williams. Guys, Ben Johnson hired as the new Bears coach. We're going to see other hirings happen here over the next few weeks, and we're going to be talking about it. But we wanted to start there because Ben Johnson has been the hottest OC in the National Football League for the last 3 years. Lions have had the number one scoring offense the last 3 years in the NFL. Don't judge him on what you saw last weekend. His body of work speaks for itself. So that is why he got hired. Jason Canfora, Carl Dukes. Jason, let's talk about Saturday's games, man, before we get to what I thought was the best game. And I want to know what's going on in Baltimore because you're there. Mm-hmm. I'm so intrigued about what people are saying about Lamar because you know this. We love the dude. But before we get there, let's talk about another guy that we're falling in love with in the NFL, and that is Jayden Daniels. The show he put on against the Lions was ridiculous. And just to put it in perspective, guys, 299. He threw for 299. He ran for 51. We talk about his elusiveness and his escapability. It's not like the Lions didn't score. They scored 31 points. Yeah. But the Commanders turned him over. And this kid didn't make a mistake, Jason. And I got to say this. I'm giving them a shot against the Eagles. I know the Eagles are loaded. I'm giving them a shot.
They've got more than a puncher's chance. They've seen it twice. They've seen that team twice. We can talk about the second game. Hurts got hurt, and that's when it changed. And it did. But they took advantage of it. And I honestly feel like that game is where Vic Fangio's defense became a little more fallible. Like they seem to be impenetrable. Like remember what they did to Baltimore in Baltimore a couple of weeks before that. And I watched that and I'm like, well, if they can go on the road and shut down that Baltimore operation, then that defense just might be, too good for anybody to pierce. Well, since then they've been pierced a few times. And if Matt Stafford and those guys are a little more equipped with holding on to the football and those kind of elements, I think the Eagles season's already over. So yes, Jayden Daniels absolutely has a chance in this game. All the pressure's on the Eagles. Yep. The Eagles now, I'm not convinced Jalen Hurts is really all that healthy. Like I'm far from convinced he's really all that healthy. I'm not convinced.
He's not playing well. And bro, Jason, he's holding the ball so long, which we'll talk about.
And even just, like the way he's talking, like what they're saying about him doesn't pass my sniff test. I think they could be short a couple of guys in the secondary. So yeah, I mean, I think Jayden Daniels could beat them straight up if none of that's going on. But then you factor that in. This kid is, it's like he was born for the playoffs. It's like, and we saw it with these crazy fourth quarters all year. But then it is different in the playoffs. It's the best of the best, and it's faster, and it's harder hitting, and there's even more intensity. It's more urgent, and he just gets, as it gets more urgent, he gets more refined. He gets more calm. He just rises above. And let's not get it twisted here. This is not a dominant offensive line. He doesn't have incredible Zacharias and these guys. I mean, you could have Austin Eckler was like the 12th most significant running back signing in the offseason. We can go through the whole roster of skill guys. I mean,
they're not stacked. Olamide Zaccheaus? Come on.
I mean, he's turning these guys like Scary Terry. Yes, they have one weapon. Like Zach Ertz has been on his last legs for 3 years. Let's just be real about what he's worth. It's this kid. You know what I mean? And like I've seen a lot of Cliff Kingsbury. Cliff Kingsbury without this kid who looks to be one of one in terms of rookie year readiness for the big stage. I mean, Josh Allen didn't look like this his first playoff run. It took Lamar Jackson years in the playoffs to look like this. Peyton Manning didn't look like this early in his playoff career. Like we can go through the list. Like, okay, Mahomes coming off the 50 touchdown year. Yeah. Okay. But like that there's not many, man. There's just not many. And so much is put on him. Like, I really feel like he's not that he's calling this game, but he's stewarding and guiding this game through what he does at the line of scrimmage in a ridiculous manner. And then he's going out there and out executing everybody too. And again, he's doing it with, I would say, a far closer to marginal cast than I would transcendent cast of talent. I give the defense credit. Like, they held up enough. I also think if the Lions would have just said, Jahmyr Gibbs is touching this ball 30 times no matter what, I think the Lions probably win that damn game. We're not going to start with Montgomery because we always start with Montgomery because we love him and he's back. They had no answers for Jahmyr. They had no way to stop Jahmyr Gibbs. I also think if Jared Goff doesn't fumble that ball and it's 14-3, even the great Jayden Daniels may not have been able to stem that tide. But that's not what happened. And Jayden Daniels made no mistakes. And Jared Goff made a shitload of mistakes. And that's sort of how that game, like, that's the story of that game. That's the story of the Baltimore-Buffalo game. Like, that's the story of the Rams-Eagles game. So, yeah, I think despite the talent imbalance, despite being on the road, I think Washington, I don't think they're going to fear going back to Philly a second time. I don't think Philly could possibly be as loud as that dome was last week. It's just built differently. It's just the acoustics. It's just, it's just, it's not physics. I don't know what the term I'm looking for is. I get like the acoustic sciences and my limited knowledge of them, but a lifetime of going to concerts would tell me it's going to be hard for Philadelphia to be as loud and intimidating as Detroit was. And that didn't bother him a whiff. And the Lions were healthy and tuned up, at least as healthy as they were going to get. I understand the long-term injuries. The Eagles played a game that went all 4 quarters against the Rams. The Eagles had guys suffered new, fresh injuries in that game. I know that the Commanders lost Ben Cosme. I don't think a guard is going to slow. I don't think a guard slowing them down. So it's going to be interesting. Can they mitigate for at least a half? Are they going to stop Saquon Barkley? No. Can they muddy it up for a half to stay in it to the second half, right? And then if Philly wants to keep running the ball in the second half, that's fine. That's not, well, with Saquon, it can be super explosive. But if they can just limit the explosive 50-plus yard runs from Saquon and make them earn it, I think Washington can absolutely win this football game. Now, that might prove to be a very big if, though.
Yeah, and look, we'll get into the particulars on Thursday as we start to look closer at this game. We'll give you our numbers as far as the spread and what we think about the over-unders. But the concern, like with anything with the Eagles is their defensive front, right? I mean, Jalen Carter, all these guys, they're beast up there. And to your point, though, Washington has seen it. So they're not going in. This is not something new.
No.
And I'll say this, Jason. I spoke to a couple of coaches that I know on that Washington staff, and I'm like, did you know, right? Because as the season goes along, you're kind of like, all right, we got to feel the 2-3 guys that I spoke to all said this group came together a lot faster than we expected. And the reason is because of what you said with Jayden Daniels. Like, that's the glue. And to your point about the talent disparity, I think we can all agree the Eagles have the best roster in the league. That's why the pressure's on them to get this done. But to hear them say to me, like, we won some games, because I think, Jason, it was like 8 games during the season where they won on the last possession or something like that with the Commanders. So to your point about the confidence of like, hey, we need a touchdown, we need a field goal, no big deal. They did that. But how this group came together so quickly is the craziness. And I think, Dan Quinn, listen, been here. Dude, they've overachieved already. If they go beat the Eagles and he goes back to the Super Bowl in year one as the Commanders' new coach, we know they're getting a new stadium. We know the fan base is lit right now. Like, everything is coming together. Now, will they lose Cliff Kingsbury? I don't know, Jason. What are you hearing there?
I think Chicago, like if Chicago didn't get Ben Johnson, I think Cliff Kingsbury was very much in the mix there. Could I see Tom Brady maybe going that way? Possibly. It's hard for me to see, a lot of other fits there. I don't see him in New York.
And by the way,
I don't see him in New Orleans without a quarterback. Like Jacksonville, I don't even know if he's in the mix there, to be honest, right now.
Right? Allegedly.
Yeah, I mean, he has not. Cliff Kingsbury, at this point, you haven't heard about a second interview. Now, they can't, Cliff Kingsbury's still coaching, so there's different rules that apply there. So that makes his situation a little different. It's not as transparent as some of these other ones. So it could be that, look, we're going to have second interviews with a bunch of guys we can have second interviews with, string it out this week, and then see what happens in the championship games. If I'm Jacksonville, I'm hiring a different offensive coordinator who was in the playoffs until recently and now is no longer. I would hire Todd Monken. But we'll see. Monken, as of this taping, hasn't had a second interview yet, but they're finishing up exit interviews in Baltimore. So it's not like they'd have to do that immediately. But my guess right now is based on what's left out there in the field that Kingsbury's back. And next year he'll probably have a little more. Ben Johnson's out of, is gone. There's not a whole lot of other up and coming young OCs that people are gaga for right now. And so I think Cliff will be pretty well positioned next year.
Let's talk about the Texans and Chiefs. And you can follow us here on YouTube as well. You can watch us in the Huddle pod, guys, and follow Jason, follow Baldy and myself. We talk nothing but ball on this podcast. It's NFL playoffs, NFC, AFC championship games, and we'll break that down on Thursday or Friday for you guys as we get towards the weekend. Listen, C.J. Stroud didn't make any mistakes, but he didn't throw any touchdowns either.
Exactly.
And Jason, I think we all get caught up in this whole, Travis Kelce, Taylor Swift thing. This dude had 7 catches for 117 yards. And it's not as if Patrick Mahomes threw for 350. He threw for $177. So of the 177, Kelce had 117. It's crazy. And they just turn it on.
Well, I think they just decided we're going to stay away from Stingley. We're going to, the corners are playing really well. Well, let's attack the safeties and leave the corners alone. And if that means we eliminate the wide receivers, including, hey, we just got Hollywood Brown back. And, hey, we traded for D-Hop a couple months ago to make us better in the playoffs. And, hey, Xavier Worthy's not a rookie anymore. He's played a whole season. Well, that's great, but we don't need them for this one. I mean, that's just the genius of the Kansas City Chiefs and Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. And so they just said we're going to attack them differently. We're going to acknowledge that our defense and special teams are our best units. So offense, don't F it up. They took a few deep shots. Hollywood Brown had one in his hands he should have held on to.
Yep.
The corner plays it through the ground, knocks it away. But it really wasn't about that. It was about the occasional deep shot. It was more about, okay, let's see what those safeties and linebackers can do with Kelce and a little bit of Noah Gray and throw into the running back a little bit. And that was enough because now the Chiefs, I'm old enough to remember when Patrick Mahomes was leading the NFL in interceptions around like week 9. That happened. They haven't turned the ball over in 8 weeks. So they're not giving it up to you. Spag's red zone defense is tuned in. Special teams units have been blocking stuff all year long. And that's a really intimidating place to have to go to save your season. So they played smart football. They were the smarter team, more high IQ team. They had a game plan that worked. And, the Texans haven't scored in the second half all season long. Texans needed to win that first half.
Yeah.
And they didn't. They should have. They could have. They had multiple opportunities to go into halftime with a lead. They couldn't. They couldn't score enough points. I just think this Kansas City thing is inevitable. I mean, we're talking about a quarterback who's now 16-3 in the playoffs.
Crazy. Hadn't lost in the divisional round.
Never lost in the divisional round. And yeah, this was it was almost like a cruise. I mean, I hate to say it, but it was almost like a cruise control game. Like, we've got this set of ideas that we think will work. It's a lot of high percentage passes. It's not too fancy. Patrick, you're not going to look like a star. Receivers just block, and we'll be fine. Patrick, when you got to use your legs, use them, which he continues to do expertly. And it's survive and advance. And it's going to be interesting. I know the Bills are plus 27 in the turnover margin this year. But like, I don't think you're going to Arrowhead and turning them over 2 or 3 times. Like, I mean, maybe you are. Like, maybe the football gods are just with you, and you're so adroit at punching the ball out of people's hands, like Peanut Tillman or whatever. Like, I don't know. Maybe, but I doubt it. And if you're predicated on turnovers to get stops, and you're going against this machine as they're trying to get to a 3rd straight Super Bowl, I would say you're probably going to need more than that. You're going to need more pass rush. And that's the thing. Like, Houston had the ability to exploit some of the Chiefs' vulnerabilities, and they did it. They did it up front. Now, they also, Carl, you got to beat the officials too. That's just, I mean, that's not conspiracy theory. That's not, tin hat stuff. You're not getting calls in Arrowhead, and they are going to get calls. They do get, like, it just happens. And Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs is treated like Michael Jordan was in the playoffs. It's a different level of protection, for lack of a better word. And I think that gets in other teams' heads as well.
So, Jason, there's no doubt about it. The world was complaining about the calls in this game. And look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the league called the officials on the sideline and said, hey, tell Andy
That's not how it works.
Yeah, go take a safety and make sure that this thing covers. But it looks suspicious. You know what I mean? Like, it was like, whoa, wait a minute. So everybody was complaining about that. But the calls, Jason, aren't we in an era now where the Chiefs have become the Patriots? Didn't we talk about this when the Patriots were rolling?
Look, I found Patrick Mahomes to immediately be one of the more humble, easily likable, immediate megastars in this sport or any sport. Like, the way he handled himself, he's self-effacing. The commercials with Andy Reid,
yeah,
everything about him was pretty endearing. Now, he also hasn't had to deal with a whole lot of adversity yet. We'll see what that can always, it didn't bring out the best in Tom Brady. I can tell you that. When he started blowing off post-game interviews when they lost, and stewing with Belichick, and not not the most cordial handshakes in the world and all that. I don't think we have to worry about that with Mahomes, but I do think he's relishing being the heel, and he is selling out to try to get calls that he knows in his heart, being the gamesman that he is and the student of the game, that it's horse shit. It's chicken shit. And he knows it, and he can't stop doing it because he keeps working for his team. And I think that's what pisses people off, because the officials at some level, whether they don't know it in real time, but they know it once they gather up and confer, or certainly they know it, I hope, when they get their talking points from the league afterwards, which how about the head of officiating going on Pravda State Television the day after the game telling you did not see what you saw. You did not see those 2 defenders run into each other. That was a penalty. So that's the lengths they're willing to take it, which, again, you're not helping. Like, whoever PR, NFL PR, you really suck at this. You're not fooling people. Gaslighting people isn't the answer. Get a grip. It's you need to change the way this is officiated. And I know it's hard to do in real time in the playoffs, but when you see Mahomes throwing himself to the sidelines trying to get calls, and then you see literally Lamar Jackson dragged 5 feet out of bounds, and there's not even a thought to call that, you've got an optics problem. And guess what? Optics are reality. And there's always going to be some special, circumstances afforded some people. But there are going to be a lot of playoff games in Arrowhead, just like there were in Foxborough. And this is different because you've embraced gambling in a way you told us it was the devil back then. And now, if it was the devil, then you're Satan, is where we are now. And, if that's hell, if gambling is hell, you're Satan. So I think it does require a different level of explanation and a different level of transparency. And frankly, that eye in the sky is going to have to be more involved. If only to start in the playoffs. And I'm not saying it's the Pandora's box of everything's reviewable, but this is not good enough. This is because he knows what's going on and he's leaning into it, and you're not putting any guardrails up.
That's the issue. And listen, do I blame Mahomes? No. It's like Michael Jordan.
No, he doesn't run the league
to get calls. If you're going to give him calls, then that's just what's going to happen. I don't blame him, but this is where the league has to step in and show the way. I agree with you 200% because this is the question coming off the weekend. Look, we're about to talk about the Lamar situation and the Bills and what happened with the Eagles here in a second. But this was the overwhelming discussion about what's going on in the league, the officiating, correct calls, one team being, getting more weight than the other. I mean, like all this stuff. And that shouldn't be the case. All we want as fans is fairness. All we want is to know that, hey, this is on the up and up. And this team beat this team, and that's just what it was, not because of some shadiness that we're some gray area where we're all concerned about. So I'm with you, man. That is something that the league is certainly going to have to address as we get to the offseason. Jason La Canfora, Carl Dukes, it's in the huddle. Baldy is going to be with us on Thursday. The Eagles-Rams game, the best part about this was the snow, right? I mean, it's snowing. It looked like football. It was great. I got to say this, though, Jason. I think if this was a clear afternoon,
we're going to L.A. for the championship game.
I think the Rams beat these guys. I really do. And I know it's like sour grapes, and Eagles fans are going to be like, oh, you're crying. Listen, they were not only in this game, they had a chance to win this game. And I do think the conditions played a role. Now, both teams had to deal with it. But I just felt like the way the Rams were moving the football and what was going on, under different circumstances, it may have been a different result. But it wasn't. Eagles were back in the NFC Championship game. But you said it. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Jalen Hurts. How well is he going to play moving forward? If, in fact, they get, past the Commanders and then into the Super Bowl, for me, he's playing the worst of any quarterback left. Is that fair?
He looks the most uncomfortable, for sure. He looks it almost seems to me in that game, it was like, we're going to activate his legs all over the place. And I'm like, well, I get what you're doing, but my problem is I don't think he can push the ball downfield. I know he can take off and run when things break down. I know he can still squat 700 pounds or whatever. I know you're still going to lean into the tush push at times, but he doesn't look comfortable to me doing much of anything. And there's now 2 weeks where he's had a chance to put this to rest with his words, and he hasn't done it. He's done anything but. And they've had a chance to put it to rest, and they haven't. And he did get knocked. I mean, everybody saw him in different degrees of agony at different points in that game and walking with a limp and grabbing different things. Like, I don't think this is an elaborate affectation. Like, I don't think this is a 5-week ruse now going back to when he suffered the concussion. Like, I don't think he's anywhere near 100%. And I don't know the extent of all of it, but I do know I took Washington at plus 225 early in the week because I'm like, if he starts missing practice time, if Sirianni on a Wednesday says something he shouldn't say or something slips and I don't think that situation's getting better through the week. And I'm also, again, looking at some of their issues with their secondary and how banged up some of those guys are. But yeah, Washington's got the better quarterback right now and the healthier quarterback, and I don't think it's close. Could the Eagles still just win this game with Hurts and Barkley and a little bit of Gainwell on the ground and not having to throw the ball?
Sure.
It's possible. Like, it is certainly possible that their offensive line just road grades. And certainly that Washington defense cannot attack them with the blitz, or not even the blitz, with the pass rush the way the Rams could. And that's despite the Rams, losing one of their dominant defensive linemen early in that game.
Fisk, yeah.
But the Eagles just seem they certainly seem a little vulnerable to me on both sides of the ball. I have some. I don't feel about them now the way I would have a month ago.
Fair, and I don't either. And look, a win's a win. You take it. The run game is so dominant. Saquon has been so dominant. Yes, you could do that, and you could run clock and take the pressure off of Jalen Hurts. But here's the problem for Eagles fans: even if they were to win that way on Sunday, you still got to play either Josh or Mahomes in the Super Bowl. And
in a neutral site on a great day to pitch and catch in a dome.
Yes, you're not going to be able to win that way, I don't believe, in the Super Bowl. You're going to have to rely on Hurts to make some plays. So, yes, you could do that now. I don't think you do that in a couple of weeks from now.
Well, and can Washington attack them early? Can Jayden Daniels start this game hot? Because if Washington gets up 2 scores,
now
and the quarterback's banged up, I just think, I'm not a guy, you could say for any game, what's the key to the game? Fast start. I mean, you could say that any sport, any game, anytime, exhibition to Super Bowl. But especially after what they did to Vic Fangio's defense. Now, I don't think Fangio is going to blitz anything close to what he did. It's not who he is. It's not what he believes in. He tried it against Jayden Daniels. He got split in half by it. So I don't think they're going to have that same approach. But, there's no Nakobe Dean. Now, if Mitchell's banged up and a safety's banged up and Jayden Daniels comes in hot and that 15-play, 25-play script leads them to 2 scores early, this thing could get real interesting real fast.
No doubt. I can't wait. We'll break that down coming up later in the week. Let's talk about the Ravens-Bills before we get out of here. I'm heartbroken for Mark Andrews, man. I mean, this dude makes catches. He makes plays. He did all season long. And then the way Lamar reacted after the game, natural frustration. But I thought they played better than the Bills. I just did, Jason. And I thought I thought, again, you score that 2-point conversion. Again, hindsight is 20/20. I felt like if that thing went to OT, the Ravens were going to win that game. That's just where I was.
If they win the coin flip, the Bills are not getting a stop.
No, I think it's over. And so with that said, what's the reaction with Lamar in Baltimore?
Well, the Ravens played better. They didn't play smarter. And that's why they're home and the Bills are still playing. I mean, they outgained them by 150 yards. Josh Allen accumulated 147 net yards in that game, in part because Joe Brady coached as scared as anybody I've ever seen at home in a playoff game in my life with a quarterback of that caliber. But the Ravens had 7.3 yards per play in a road playoff game. The other quarterback had 147 total yards and 4.6 yards per play, and they lost. How? The other team has 8 turnovers all year, and you damn near had half of 8 turnovers in this game. You had 3. So that's it. And Buffalo's red zone defense, bowed up a couple times. And Todd Monken, how can you nitpick an offensive coordinator when he rolls up 150 more yards than the other team, 7.3 yards per play, 9.6 net yards per passing attempt? How can you criticize him? Well, some of the red zone play calling was odd. Never activating Lamar's legs. No design runs for Lamar was odd. And the Buffalo Bills made big-time adjustments to try to stop the run after getting gutted the first game. And they run blitzed on early downs, and they had different personnel available to them than the last meeting. And it was pretty clear they were selling out to take away Derrick Henry. So there's 2 things that Todd Monken could have done. He could have said, oh, yeah, that's fine. We're going to get even heavier than you, and we're going to bring in the 6th offensive lineman and keep the fullback on the field, and we're going to play with no wide receivers, and we're still going to road grade you. They did that one time in a non-goal line situation. It was midfield on a 3rd and 1. Derrick Henry took it 17 yards, and if it was a normal Derrick Henry day, he takes it to the house. I didn't like Derrick Henry in this game, start to finish. He didn't look up for it. He didn't look right. Something was off. We'll probably never know. Something was off. But that was it. They did it one time. They never went back to it. The other way you could compensate for what they're doing is say, okay, fine. We're going to call a shitload of option plays with Justice Hill and Lamar Jackson, and one of them is going to get outside you. And so you want to sell out that way. You want to crash everything. we're going to bust it outside with Lamar, and he's going to run like he did in the Pittsburgh game 11 times in the first half. He ran 5 times. Lamar ran five straight plays at one point against the Steelers. Lamar ran 5 times in this game, and none of them were designed. So they did neither of that, which is, again, a little bit mind-boggling to me. What did the Bills do when they got in goal line situations? They cleared everything out. They went empty with their quarterback and let him finish drives.
Correct.
What did the Ravens do? Did they feed Derrick Henry 3 or 4 times behind that heavy personnel? No, they tried it once and got away from him. Did they clear everything out for Lamar and just let him find the lane? No, they didn't do that either. So, look, Buffalo they know how they're starting to learn how to win in these situations where in the past they would have found ways to lose. And they did not turn the ball over. When Lamar has the fumble and Von Miller scoops it up, they not only shifted field position, they turned it into real points. And then to the Mark Andrews of it all, Mark Andrews has not been a playoff performer his entire Ravens career. It's a fact. He has 0 touchdowns in the postseason. He has 2 games in his career. He's now played, 9 playoff games where he's had over 50 yards receiving. One of them was against Cincinnati with Snoop Huntley passing, and he caught 5 of 12 targets. The other time in his playoff career he had more than 50 passing yards was this debacle of a game he just played, where he had a drop early in the game, right, where it would have been 2nd and 2 from the 20. No one even talks about the first drop, where he gets outside leverage on the safety. Lamar hits him in the hands. He drops it. It would have been 2nd and 2 from the 20. You know what happened on the next play? Tyler Linderbaum, a first-round center who can't snap the ball, fires the ball in a way that most quarterbacks don't even get to. Lamar gets to it, then tries to do too much, and that's the fumble the other way. That's number 1.
Yep.
Number 2, a guy who doesn't have lateral quickness and speed and knows that at midfield with a chance to go ahead doesn't just run towards the goalpost. He decides I'm gonna go the other way. I'm gonna bust it off. I'm gonna break it off.
Instead of just
go in
down.
reverse,
Let's go
and then
down.
I'm gonna fumble.
Just go down.
And then when he has a chance to atone by catching a ball in his breadbasket, and don't you tell me that ball came to him late. Don't you sell that.
No. It was great. That was a great ball.
I mean, was it the most perfect pass in the world? I don't know. It was
needed
more
to be
than
low.
perfect enough.
It needed to be there.
And he dropped it. I don't know if they stopped Josh Allen after that. He might not have sent it to overtime. I will say this. If that game goes to overtime and the Ravens win the coin toss.
Done deal.
I mean, Lamar has that 90-yard drive. No Zay Flowers. No Rashad Bateman. He's going with Tylan Wallace and Justice Hill with the season on the line, and he has a chance to send it to overtime. And the Ravens' all-time touchdown leader in receptions can't catch a 2-point conversion. And then Mark Andrews doesn't show up to the media after the game, and then everybody's clearing out their lockers and guys are taking accountability. Mark Andrews got out of town before the media got there. So if I'm running the Baltimore Ravens, Mark Andrews has played his last game for me. He's got 1 year left on his deal. He's got a $4 million roster bonus the 5th day of the league year and a $7 million salary, $11 million. I'm giving it to Isaiah Likely. I'm getting in on him early. I'm redistributing a little bit to Bateman, who took a real low deal last year to stay with them. And I'm trading Mark Andrews. They're never going to pay 2 tight ends anyway.
No,
and
that makes sense.
And I think there's no, extending Andrews when you haven't paid Likely yet never made sense. So I'm moving on. I'm not saying you get a ton for him. Maybe you can get a 4 that if he has 8 touchdowns again, moves up to something else. But he's never showed up in the playoffs. He just hasn't. And he also got his ass kicked in pass protection all night long.
This was the moment, though, right? Because it was the crescendo of Lamar. And by the way, I should say this before we get out of here. If you're blaming Lamar for this loss, you're an idiot.
Yeah.
Okay? I'm just letting you guys know. For everybody that just wants to jump on and pile on, you're an idiot. Jason's laying out for you exactly what took place. And this dude is hitting guys in the freaking hands. And
Tylan Wallace with the season online.
And they can't hold on to the rock. So with that said, I understand his frustrations. One other thing, and you mentioned this. Listen, Justice Hill had 50 yards on 6 carries. Why didn't they give him the rock more?
I told you, they had 2 choices to make. Get super heavy with Derrick Henry, or don't wait till desperation time, 2 minutes for Justice Hill. Justice Hill in the pistol with Lamar Jackson.
He was killing it.
they would have had no answers for it with that personnel. So you run them out of that personnel with that, and then go back to Derrick Henry under center with the fullback. Like, they waited too long to make their adjustments. And yeah, that was not Todd Monken's finest hour by a long shot. And Lamar's first half wasn't good enough. The second half was A-plus football.
I agree. 27-25, Bills move on. We're going to talk about the Bills and Chiefs later in the week. Huge spot for Josh Allen. He gets another shot to knock off Mahomes and company, but they got to do it on the road. They knew that already. And then we get to the shocker. Washington heads to Philly for a chance to go to the Super Bowl with the rookie quarterback. I mean, this is why the NFL is the best. And I cannot wait. Baldy will join us, Jason. We'll talk about it. We're going to give you the numbers. We'll give you our picks. And we'll give you the reasons why we think what teams are going to win these AFC and NFC championship games. Make sure you're here. Subscribe, like us. And guys, tell your friends so you don't miss an episode. It's in the Huddle. And you can watch us on YouTube as well. Jason, great stuff, man. We will talk about these games coming up later in the week. And we'll also get you caught up on the hirings. Some stuff's going to happen here in the next few days. We'll see. We don't want to jump the gun because a lot of this stuff could change, but we'll be on top of that as well. So make sure you tune in, guys, and check us out. It's in the Huddle.